Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and in the spirit of the trees, in the spirit of living nature, of which we are a part, with deep gratitude to all the generations before us that have brought us to the present moment, I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we complete a 5-day program on the challenge and crisis of democracy, both in the United States and around the world. I want to note as we begin that just moments ago, literally, the Supreme Court handed down a decision by a vote of 6-3 to eliminate officially a woman's constitutional right to abortion in the United States. The expectations are that very shortly, about half the states, about 25 or so states, will ban abortion for all practical purposes for women in those states. So this is a somber moment in many ways as we contemplate the ongoing viability of our democracy. But there's another equally, I think, profound note that can be made that came to me as I was watching the January 6th congressional hearings yesterday with the various people from the Justice Department who stood up in the Oval Office to then President Trump and said that if he replaced the Attorney General with a gentleman named Jeff Clark, they would all resign en masse. And what occurred to me, which I wanted to bring in today, is that what the hearings have profiled are what John Kennedy would have called profiles in courage. Think of Lady Ruby and her daughter, Sean Peters, who ordinary poll workers there in Fulton County, Georgia, did what they were supposed to do. Think of Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State of Georgia, who just did what he was supposed to do and defied a president live before the world. And what was occurring to me as I was listening to the hearings generally, but it struck me in particular yesterday, is that these are the people that are going to go down in history as the saviors of our democracy in that election in 2020, where there were forces at play, as we all know, that were seeking and are still seeking to transact a coup to preserve illegitimate power of a president who refused to concede defeat. And you know, when we read our history books, it's worth just noting that most of the great people that we look back on with admiration and respect weren't particularly great. They were very ordinary. And yet they found themselves in a situation where they had to make choices. And in making those choices, greatness came upon them. Because for reasons they may not have even understood, they decided to stand against the darkness. They decided to stand for truth. You know, one thinks of Rosa Parks. It was nothing particularly great about Rosa Parks or even Martin Luther King or Paul Revere or Thomas Jefferson. They were just ordinary people living anonymous lives like we all are for the most part. And yet when it came down to it, they took a stand. And that stand moved history in a particular way. So as we contemplate democracy in the United States, particularly as we'll discuss today in the lead up to the November elections, knowing how critical it is that we all get out and vote and that we all participate in every way that we can. Let us just remember that each of us is called to make choices. And each of us is called to act. And in those actions, the great moments of the preservation of democracy, generation by generation, continues on. Before we dive into our program, let us just take a moment and just pause, as we always do, and just center yourself in your body. Feel that you are nature. And for the next minute or so, close your eyes and attune yourself with your heart. And think of Lady Ruby. Think of her daughter, Sean. Think of Brad Roethlisberger. Others that stood tall. Thank you, everyone. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce two dear friends and colleagues who've been convening the program for this week. George Cappannelli, who's the founder and CEO of Age Nation and a passionate crusader for democracy. And John Steiner, who with his wife, Margo King, networkers par excellence, have been working tirelessly for decades to support transpartisan politics and the ongoing viability of democracy in America. So George, John, thank you so much for all that you've done. And I welcome you to Humanity Rising and turn the program over to you.
Thanks, Jim. As always, terrific to be here. We have a great program today, one I've been waiting for some time, because it involves many of us who are in the second half of our lives, and frankly, who are responsible for a lot of the mess that we're dealing with in America today, inadvertently, either by omission or commission. It's been a great week. We've covered the ground from an organization at the beginning of the week called the Next 50 that is looking at future leaders. We've had some candidates on, one, Stephen Olikara from Wisconsin, running for the Senate. Maggie Oliver's from New Mexico, Secretary of State. Her campaign manager was on, Eleanor LeCain, former Assistant Secretary of State from Massachusetts. On Wednesday, we had quite a collection of bright lights from Danny Sheehan and Harvey Wasserman, just a great collection of voices that have been in the trenches for a very long time. Yesterday, we had three remarkable women talking about critical issues that impact democracy. One of the original founders of MoveOn.org, one of the current co-founders of Indivisible, and a young woman who's doing remarkable work with young people across the country. So today we're going to look at people in the second half of life, and we're going to have the gift of having three organizations represented. And I'm going to introduce our first guest who's on screen, Bill McKibben, and then John will make some opening comments and introduce the other guests. Bill is an author, educator, and environmentalist. He originally helped co-found the 350 org, which was the first grassroots climate change organization. He has recently founded what's called the Third Act, and Bill's going to tell us about what the Third Act does. Contributing writer to the New Yorker, serves as the Schumann Distinguished Professor in Residence at Middlebury College. In 2014, he was awarded the Right Livelihood Prize, sometimes called the Alternative Nobel Prize in Swedish Parliament. Also won the Gandhi Peace Award, has 19 honorary degrees from different colleges and universities, and has written over a dozen books. His new book, The Flag, the Cross, and the Station Wagon, we heartily encourage you to find a copy and pick it up and read it. So Bill, welcome. It's good to have you with us.
It's very, very good to be with you. And if you'd like, I'll just say a few words about this work we're doing at Third Act. And
actually, Bill, if we're going to introduce your,
good.
Better
yet,
guests first. But
I'll wait for your cue.
Thanks, Bill. John?
Thank you, George. And Jim, I just want to say thank you for your opening remarks. Before I introduce our other three remarkable political entrepreneurs, I'm going to get up on my soapbox for a minute. Let's call it like it is. Donald Trump has committed attempted murder of our democracy. The Supreme Court, we might now call the Taliban court. In terms of what they're doing, will women be required to wear veils next? And let's call the Republican Party truly for what it is. They are the real rhinos. So knowing that we're up against Code Red for democracy, I want to introduce three other amazing folks of my generation who, and I really call all of you political entrepreneurs, having stepped up, not expecting to do what you're doing, because we need to have it done and we need to organize, and we're all social entrepreneurs together. So with that in mind, Nancy, let's have you on the screen as well. I'm going to start with our two wonderful friends at Force Multiplier, an all-volunteer grassroots political fundraising organization of folks over 60 that raises funds for Democratic candidates for federal office and for groups that defend and expand the right to vote, which we'll talk a lot more about today. They've already raised and donated a lot of money. Laura, welcome. You became the Force Multiplier co-chair soon after you all created the organization. I've been on a number of phone calls with you and Tom. I love what you're doing. You had a 27-year career as a senior administrator at Harvard Medical School. I don't think we'll get into that today, but that's very impressive. You've worked with Oxfam America, and as co-chair of the Force Multiplying Fundraising Committee, you spent a lot of time raising money for the candidates we need to protect our democracy. Tom, I was really moved by the fact to find out that for 22 years, you worked as the associate publisher at Beacon Press, where you worked on books by our wonderful Reverend William Barber, Howard Zinn, who many of us know is a great American historian, Mary Oliver, the remarkable poet, and the beloved Thich Nhat Hanh, who died not too long ago. So thank you for Again, we could do a whole program of the remarkable prophetic writer activists that you've been involved with. So you're the member of the Force Multipliers founding group and have been involved with political activism since George Bush 1 came along. And thanks for being a citizen political activist and entrepreneur. Nancy, welcome. What I want to say first, and you mentioned this to us earlier, you served for 10 years as president of the Pro-Choice Resource Center. What this decision must be for you particularly, I can't imagine. And you've had an amazing educational career ranging with, and this is rare, teaching first grade in Newton, Massachusetts, to serving as a senior associate at the National Institute of Education and an academic appointment at George Mason. You've worked with CERES, which is a remarkable organization regarding the economy and sustainability. You've been involved with legal services and the National Center for Law and Justice. So welcome, the three of you. That is, again, it's really an honor to be on screen with all of you. And George, as we often do, take us away with the first question.
Well, I think the most important question is, let's just take a few minutes each, if you would, to add some additional information to what John has said, and to give Bill a chance to talk a little more specifically about the third act and why it was created and what you're doing.
Bill, you want to jump in?
Indeed I do. And what a pleasure to be with you all. It is indeed a dark day in American democracy, and that's part of the work that we're about at Third Act. This is a group of people over the age of 60 organizing for progressive change and doing it quite conscious of our age, which is an interesting part of this story. If you're in your 60s or 70s or 80s now, in the first act of your life, you were around for very interesting social, cultural, political transformation, including, of course, the acceptance of the idea that women were going to be full parts of our society. And with that, the enshrinement of a woman's right to choose as a basic constitutional liberty. That remarkable first act, with many noble exceptions represented by the people on this call, generationally gave way to a second act, perhaps more interested in consumerism than in citizenship. But that water is under the bridge, and now people are emerging into the third act of their lives, nearer the exit than the entrance, as it were, with lots of skills acquired over a lifetime, lots of resources. Older Americans have about 70% of the country's financial assets, perhaps time in a way that they didn't before, and in the form of kids and grandkids, something that makes that abstract idea of legacy much more real. And so that's why over the last few months, as we've rolled out this third act, thirdact.org group, people have been flocking in very large numbers to help out, to join in. The two projects that we've undertaken most directly are about protecting democracy, trying to stand up to voter suppression, to register voters, to turn people out, and to stand up for the stability of our climate. In particular, we're doing our best to take on the big financial institutions, the major banks and things that continue lending money in enormous quantities to the fossil fuel industry. It's been good fun to start trying to gather this tribe together. People are doing it in the right spirit. The last demonstration I was at outside a branch of Chase Bank, organized by one of the Third Act affiliates, had lots and lots of high school kids there who were being somewhat sprier, leading the march, but behind them a big cloud of older people under a banner that said "Fossils Against Fossil Fuels." So one of the things that makes this really fun is that many of the icons from that first act are still around and still participating. So when I talk with younger people, I say, you can fight me if you want, but one thing about our generation, we produce the best music of all time. So it's good fun to have Carole King and Bette Midler and Neil Young and Patti Smith and others helping out with this work. And we're going to continue to try and do what we can to prevent any more backsliding like we saw today from where we thought we were when we were younger than we are at the moment. So many thanks.
Thanks, Bill. So John gave some information about Force Multiplier and your organization, Nancy. A few more words early on, and then let's.
Laura and Tom.
Yes.
Multiplier.
No, but I was talking to Nancy about her organization. Thank you.
Pardon.
That's okay. Don't do it again.
Okay, the name of the organization that I'm affiliated with, it's actually an unaffiliated organization. We're not a 501c3. It's called Seniors Taking Action. When seniors act, democracy wins. I'm a linguist by training. I'm a theoretical linguist by training, so I care a lot about language. And I had originally suggested the title of Feisty and Focused, Seniors Taking Action, to show that we are a force to be reckoned with. It began with 4 of us over lunch, being very frustrated about what was happening in our democracy in 2019. And out of that, we started a group of people, 12, who came together to write postcards. And then the pandemic hit. And so we then morphed quickly into writing postcards, people doing it at home, but also creating a Zoom presence. And we now have, and we also, as I said, we started with 12 people. We now have 500 people on our mailing list. And we get anywhere from 35 to 75 or 80 people on our Zoom calls once a week. And our Zoom calls have consisted of, actually Bill was on it, so that consisted of activists, that consisted of academics, that consisted of candidates, policymakers, and most recently we had this really wonderful guy in the advertising world named Ellis Verdi, who really believes if you don't cause controversy with your ads, keep your money, because what you really want to do is to have people stand up and take notice. And he did a lot of work for me, actually, when I ran the Pro-Choice Resource Center, when we did a project trying to involve young people. And one of the ads that really should be on today was he had an ad, this was in the 90s, he had an ad of an abortion clinic, but the abortion clinic was a taxi cab in a back alley. And unfortunately, that might come true again today. What our group does is we do postcarding, we do letters to the editing, we do Zooming, we do reaching out. We've created a giving circle where we're really focusing on North Carolina. And we do a lot of trying to do some intergenerational things. But the purpose was to bring seniors together who were really feeling frustrated and not knowing what to do, and giving them some sense of purpose and an ability to do both voter registration, which we do with the cards, and also getting out the vote. And I'll stop there.
And Nancy, is your website Seniors Taking Action?
It's on there, it's live. And you can get a list of all the people that we have had talk to us and some of the postcarding. We work with the Field Team 6, Activate America, and Tony the Democrat. So those are the 3 places where we really get. And one of our members, actually her husband, is an artist, and he has been doing voter registration postcards that we use and also get out the vote. So I can talk more about that. His name is Bill. It will come to me in a minute. You can tell I'm over 60, right?
Laura and Tom, take it away.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, John, George, Jim. Force Multiplier is, I think, perhaps a poster child for Third Act. We started it in 2017, bunch of third actors before the term had been coined, who were horrified that he who shall not be named was elected and we needed to figure out what to do. So ever since then, we've been raising money. That's all we do. We raise money for candidates for the House and the Senate and voter empowerment groups in battleground states, whether it's presidential battleground states or Senate battleground states. Our theory of change is no matter what issue keeps you up at night, whether it's climate change, voter protection, the right to choose, gun safety. If we don't have a Democratic Congress, we're going to make no movement forward. And so we're laser focused on supporting those candidates that need our support the most. We like Seniors Taking Action. We do events on Zoom twice a month. That's how we raise money. In fact, Bill will be our guest next week in support of one of our most treasured voter empowerment groups, which Tom will be able to describe to you in a little bit. We're now a community of over 9,000 people. We've raised $10 million. We've raised 3 million of that 10 just in this cycle. We invite folks like Jamie Raskin and Adam Schiff to come talk to our donors. Most of our donors only give about $100 per event. There's no minimum to come to our events. So we welcome everybody. And I'll leave it at that for now.
Tom, do you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I do have a couple things to add. I guess I would say that we did not set out to be a group that was of over 60-year-old people doing that, but it turns out when you do start off with a group of a dozen white-haired older people and you do relational networking, you end up with a larger group of white-haired people. And that's basically what's happened with our community. And I think we've sort of decided to embrace our identity as elders and recognize that there is a role that we're playing in society, that we have the time, we have the skills, we have the resources, and being able to put all of those in the service of candidates and groups. The groups are largely led by younger people and people of color who are taking the lead in these movements feels like a really filling an appropriate generational responsibility. And so we are really embracing that identity.
Thank you.
I'd like to add one thing that I forgot to say, that we began with a group of 4 people in New York City, but we are now in 13 states where people who join our Zoom calls once a week and are doing postcards. And so we're in New York, Colorado, North Carolina, Florida, Maine, New Hampshire, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Iowa, Massachusetts, Virginia, Washington, D.C., Illinois, and New Jersey. And our goal, hopefully going forward, is to really have people who participate with us in all 50 states. So we've made progress over the last 4 years, and we continue to hope that we will continue to grow and outreach and continue to network.
I want to add to that, I'm delighted that you all are working with Activate America, because we had Doug Linney on in our second week of dialogues at the end of April. So great that you all are together.
Yeah, we're really looking for partners, to work with. We know that there's no one group, just like no one individual can really do it all alone. So how we bring people together, and we often have other groups that participate in our calls as well.
So I have a follow-up question for you. Michael Mead, I don't know if you know Michael's work. He's a storyteller and a mythologist, and wonderful book called Fate and Destiny. Highly recommend it. So Michael divides those of us who are in this part of life into 2 categories, olders and elders. Olders who tend to not to have done a lot of work on themselves and their well-being over time and have become a little rigid and calcified. and elders being people who have earned the title through continuing to work at the issues of their lives and then giving back to society as a whole. In your experience, how serious are people in the demographic that you're working with and on? How serious are they taking the threat to democracy?
It's a very one-word answer. Very.
I think it's really the foremost in people's minds in our community, and that the frame is often what kind of world are we leaving to our children and our grandchildren. Many of them are grandparents, so I think people very much view this as a chance to, create a legacy of democracy for the future generations, and totally understand that it is at risk. That's how it is in our network.
Many of us could describe our lives the way Bill did at the beginning of this. In our first act, we were active politically in one movement or another. In the second phase of life, we were very focused on our children and our families and our careers. And now we have the privilege, really, it's a privilege, to go back to those issues that were so meaningful to us before all of the responsibilities of adulthood. But now, as Tom said, we have the wisdom, the skills, the time, and the resources to really make an impact. And that's why we are so focused on one thing, which is a democratic Congress. And it resonates with so many people around the country who have worked on the issues, have done so many other kinds of important work. But this seems to be a galvanizing, centering focus, because as we know from this morning's decision of SCOTUS, when the Republicans control the Senate, bad things happen.
What's interesting is the way that we took some of these things very much for granted. So in the early parts of our lives, we were around for, say, the enactment of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. And it appeared that the franchise was expanding. And it appeared that democracy, though threatened by things like Watergate, was working. I mean, in that case, the system actually finally functioned, and we booted the guy out on his rear end. And I think that may have set us up for the idea that that we could take that basic stability more or less for granted. And any thought of that ended, on January 6th, when people watched the heretofore incredible sight, literally incredible, beyond credibility, idea of people storming the nation's capital and killing police officers in order to stop the process of an election. And so I think that accounts for that sense that something that we had is slipping away, there's a very powerful sense of loss. I will add, however, that people are also pretty clear that there are several places we need to wield power in this society. It's a even numbered year, so elections are really important. But politics doesn't end after election day, and politics and social change get acted out in many venues. So we're as focused on Wall Street as we are on Washington. And oddly, it's possible to argue at this point that it may be quicker and easier to get some progress out of Wall Street than it is out of our almost unbelievably dysfunctional political system, a gridlocked system that it's hard to see the gridlock ending anytime soon. We have to fight desperately, I think at this point, merely to keep it gridlocked and to keep it from becoming a tool of out and out retrograde sort of American fascist aggression. So there's a ton of work to be done and on many fronts. And what a pleasure just to know and hear about all the people that are doing it together.
So I'd like to add a slightly different dimension to it in terms of what God Seniors Taking Action focused. I think people are very scared about what's happening to our democracy. And I think they were looking for some way to become involved to try to change it. And so doing some of the postcarding, for example, thinking of that and really speaking out and trying to sort of make their voice heard is what's really motivated a lot of the people that have, become active in Seniors Taking Action, that they felt that they could no longer sit by and just sit down and not get involved in some way. And again, it's looking at their grandchildren. I know myself, it's looking at my grandchildren and my children. My grandchildren range from the age of 6 to the age of 22. And there are 6 of them. And so getting them involved too at an early age and thinking about what they can do to help. So it's really just trying to make a difference and know that change is possible, and going on what other people have said and looking back at history and seeing what kind of change was possible when people got involved. I think people thought that they just couldn't sit back anymore and just watch it happen.
I wanted to jump in and say and respond to what Shannon is saying. Bill, a couple of responses to Bill's comments. One, those of us who are privileged thought things were heading in a good trajectory, but I have learned from young people and BIPOC people over the years that things were not good in the 60s and 70s and moving in the right direction for so many people. And it's almost as if those of us who came from white middle-class families woke up. The 1619 Project and things of that sort really taught me a lot, for example. And that, I think, has only empowered us and motivated us more. Because it wasn't as pretty, and as Bill mentions in his book, it wasn't as pretty as we thought it was in those glory days. But the other thing I want to remind us is that not only are we the children of protests on the mall against the war, but Cesar Chavez and the corporate work, we learned that not eating table grapes could be a powerful action. So I look forward to working with Third Act on those kinds of actions as well. But I continue to think we got to keep Congress blue.
And I think it also goes, one of the things that we're also doing in Seniors Taking Action is also working with groups that are working on downstate candidates who are running. If you look, I know from the time in the Pro-Choice Resource Center that people were starting at the school board level and then going up. So we're working at various levels in terms of really trying to get people to go out and vote for Democratic candidates at all levels who are running. And on many of the issues that all of you have talked about as well. And we've done probably close to 5,000 postcards in the years that we've been, in the 3 years that we've been together.
Bill, let me, thank you, Nancy and Laura. Let me circle back around to your work with Wall Street. Because obviously the New York Times came out, but in the last months, we've read about the corporations, really not only who have been funding the Federalist Society all these years that has led to this Supreme Court, but either funded and stopped funding and then started funding again are seditionist Republicans in Congress. And just curious whether you all are focusing on that at all, or whether you plan to, and how you see the corporate money, obviously, that's in this game is so much part of what we have to wrestle with.
Yes, absolutely. Um, you know, I'm a Vermonter, so I'm tend to follow Bernie's lead on a lot of this stuff, and I think his analysis that Citizens United was a watershed moment for our democracy is correct. And the notion that it enshrined of corporate personhood that couldn't be tampered with, couldn't be regulated in any real way, is both practically devastating and absurd at some level. And in fact, we understand it, those of us of a certain age, better than most people, because one of the central flaws with that idea is that people die and new people replace them, but corporations can go on forever and ever, and their unwavering commitment to their bottom line at the expense of almost everything else is an extraordinary problem now, and it's one of the things that sets this time apart. Ever since, ever since I think Ronald Reagan in the election of 1980, the notion that markets solve all problems has kind of taken over our political life. And clearly they don't solve all problems, or else the Arctic wouldn't be half melted, and we wouldn't have falling life expectancy in America, and we wouldn't have cartoonish levels of inequality, and we wouldn't have a host of the other traumas that we deal with. So time to really rewrite our understanding of who and how we should be governed by.
Bill, I can't agree with you more. And as you say, on some level, it shouldn't come as a surprise to us. Most of us are aware of Lewis Powell's memorandum in the 70s, 72 or 3 or whenever it was. And that really is the playbook that corporations and the Republican Party have been following. I say with regret that they've been following it with deep dedication and effectiveness.
I was writing about that just today in preparation for what may be the next huge Supreme Court ruling any day now, which will enshrine that Powell memo essentially into law and prevent federal agencies like the EPA from being able to effectively regulate business in any way. And it'll be the big victory for which they've been working for a very long time, and it's going to be a fundamental blow to our ability to do things. It's why we need to recapture Congress, or to keep control of Congress, but more, it points us in the direction of doing what the right did so effectively, which was build up a large architecture of think tanks, of donors, of all the things that over 50 years took what was in that Powell memo and made it increasingly the law of the land.
And
And
Bill,
yet
I want to add to that, and you know this, the one of the great organizations that's really working to overturn Citizens United is American Promise with Jeff Clements. And for those of you who want to go there, it's americanpromise.net. Jeff Clements is a constitutional lawyer. He's got a long game plan that's very effective and working well to do this at a constitutional level.
And at the same time, I think you mentioned it, Bill, and several others have talked about the fact that we have the power to vote, not just at the ballot box. We have the power to vote every single day with where we spend our money and where we place our attention. And I think that one of the things, since people in this sector of life, in this third act or second half of life, who do control so much of the financial wealth and legacy of the nation can do is we can vote every day, not buying products, not supporting services that are being offered by organizations that are supporting the death of democracy. And there's one thing that always gets corporations' attention, and that is revenue. The more we reduce their revenue, the more we boycott their products and services, the more we share that information with other people in our constituency, we can make a significant difference every day. And I just want our viewers and listeners to be really mindful of that, because it's a power that we, the people, have that we are not using to the degree that we could.
Yeah, I'd also like to talk about sort of what it costs now to run for office, which is sort of another piece of, where corporations are spending some of their money. And it's really, I don't know whether I'm being hyperbolic when I say that it's immoral how much it costs for people even to run for local office. And they're spending so much of their time really raising money to do that, as opposed to really getting out there and talking more about the issues and talking about the issues in real ways, not in ways that are just sound bites, but that are ways that really help people understand what is at stake. And I think the messaging, maybe that's my background as a linguist, but the language that we use to talk about what the issues are and the way they are at hand, yes, they can be uncomfortable, but you can't sugarcoat it. And how we get people to really be able to do that, I think, is a very big challenge in the work that we're doing.
I think that's one more reason to support Democrats getting control of the House and Senate. Part of why that system exists is because we haven't had enough power to overturn it. And the Voting Rights Acts that died in the Senate addressed many of those issues. So it's another argument for getting political power. I just wanted to say that this, it's not new in our history that we have to fight for our rights. That really is our history. So many of the things that we're facing now, we tend to think of as having come from Trump or having come even since Reagan. But, you look at critical race theory, and then you think about the Scopes monkey trial when teaching biology was equally controversial at the beginning of the 20th century. The voting rights thing goes back, certainly, the arguments are exactly the same in the Reconstruction South. And really goes back to the Constitution. So, I think some of this has to do with us really waking up to what our own history really is and realizing that sort of joining this fight for democracy is an ongoing thing. And it's our generation's responsibility. It's a total illusion to think that we can sit back. I felt very much like that happened after Obama was elected, that people said, we took care of that. We got Obama in there, and then they didn't show up in the midterms. And it was a disaster. So, one of the things that we've been doing to just put some flesh on that idea with Force Multiplier is to really support groups that are doing the work of building our democracy, that are registering voters, that are turning out voters, that are teaching people how to vote under the ever-changing voting laws in some states. So, getting that turnout, and just building that democracy at the grassroots, that doesn't cost, $150 million that a Senate race does. That's a place where the money can go a lot further. And it's so encouraging to see now that these groups, the New Georgia Project and Make the Road Pennsylvania, other types of groups that we are supporting, organizing now is a career. People get paid. They get paid better than a living wage to do this work. And that's possible when we support the work and we really make that happen. So, and these groups now, they're really data driven. They use research. They are using really sophisticated messages to reach out and move voters and get them to the polls. And I think it's a really important part of the work that needs to be done right now.
I'm sorry, I cut out a little bit. My internet died, but just thinking about where the conversation was when I left. My children who are in their late 20s often call me and say, Mom, was it ever this bad before? And they're frightened, as all of us are saying. You know, and we lived through those 3 assassinations, and we lived through the marches. But in my lifetime, this is by far more dangerous, more scary. And yet, going back to our history, it is when we joined together and didn't let things get worse and occasionally move things forward that has saved our democracy. And that's the lesson I'm trying to impart to my kids and the younger people that we're working with.
And at the same time, Tom and Laura, I don't disagree with you at all. And Bill has spoken to the same questions of, you know, that this is not new for us. And yet at the same time, when we listen to the anguish that is present in the voices of so many young people, they know that in this instance there is something very different, and that is that they may not have a future, and that what we do between here and November could very well be that signal. And I know from some of our other guests who represent the youth contingent and youth voting organizations and whatnot, that one of the reasons that a lot of young people are not listening, they're not paying attention, like a lot of young people apparently are not paying attention to the House Select Committee hearings, because there have been a lot of promises made and very few delivered, especially when it comes to the environment and to the well-being of our planet. So I think in this instance, as we all know, you're right, Laura, I've never experienced anything of this severity at this time. But on top of that, there's this other 800-pound gorilla looking over our shoulder, and a lot of young people who are stepping out of the game because they don't think there's any hope. Several weeks ago, we had a youth summit on mental health and the stories that those young people told. It still resonates in my head. A young woman that said, I don't know why I should get involved. I'm not even aware that the world's going to be here when I graduate from high school. So it's another message, I think, that we need to communicate to elders and invite them to reach out to younger people and let them know that this is not just a political argument. This is a time where life and death is really being determined.
And Bill, you're with young people every day. I think we'd love to hear what you're feeling just on your college campus and in response to what George and Laura and others are saying here.
Well, I've mostly organized with young people my whole life. When I started 350.org, it was with 7 college students, and we've run this vast fossil fuel divestment campaign that ended up on every college campus in the country. And the kids who came out of that founded the Sunrise movement that brought us the Green New Deal, of which Build Back Better is sort of the residue, the most effective political organizers in our country in many years. And of course, I know young people from all over the world. I know Greta Thunberg and the 10,000 other young people like her around the world who have 10 million followers. So I think that what I hear from young people all the time is a great sense of relief whenever they have some sense that older people are actually starting to take their responsibilities here seriously. And the whole, okay boomer thing is understandable on the face of it. But it's not, I think, an expression of malice as much as an expression of hope that people will start doing what, and so when people do stand up, it's greeted with great relief by young people who've been feeling kind of left alone to deal with the problems of a world that's far more difficult than the one we grew up in.
You know, that
Well, and I think there's something to be said for doing this intergenerationally too, because not only can they learn from us, but more importantly, we can learn from them. And as we hear some of the concerns and the fears and the questions that they have, some of our wisdom and sort of our experience can really sort of just magnify that and really create sort of a new dialogue. And so somebody suggested to us that we work with our name, Seniors Taking Action, that we work with seniors in high school and seniors in college, as well as seniors, 55 or 60 or older. And we're seriously looking into that and really we've had a number of groups who are doing voter registration come and talk to us. And the work that they're doing is really quite extraordinary. And their passion and their commitment to really making sure that people are registering to vote and really are brought up to speed on the issues and we hear their concerns is really very gratifying. And we just need to do more of that.
I think the four of you are obviously have a very optimistic, inspiring, and hopeful message, not just for the viewers here, but for the country and what you all are doing. And my question is, are you able to get anybody here able to get onto the major media? Is CNN or MSNBC or anybody, or even Vice Media, which speaks more to younger people, open to interviews with any of you? And do we have the kind of PR force, maybe Bill, this is more for you, that can get those of you who speak so well and eloquently into a broader public space?
Well, that's harder, but it happens on occasion. I mean, I've gotten a chance to do a lot of press over the years in various places, but I do think it's pretty clear that there is a strong affection in our communications world for younger people. That's the sort of taboo, or one of them, often for media. But it's probably breaking down somewhat just because there's so many people now in this age group. There's 70 million Americans over the age of 60. It's a population larger than France. And so I hope that this will continue to be a place where we can see more and more and more good stuff happening. To some degree, we can create our own media now, which is useful, but it doesn't make up for the fact that people need to be represented and heard on broadcast media in particular.
I have a kind of complementary question about our generations. As I look at what's going on, Lady Ruby and her daughter, and the amount of intimidation that is going on regarding poll workers and whatnot. Is there any effort being made that you're aware of to encourage those of us who can't be as easily intimidated and are of this age group to play a really active role in the election itself as poll workers, as poll watchers, as all of that? I often think, I wonder if there's a veterans organization that could do the same, because we hear a lot about poll workers being intimidated, and it's hard to intimidate vets sometimes. So what do you know about that?
I don't know anything except from personal experience that one of the things that I've noticed over the years that I've been voting, which is many, that the poll workers used to be older. The poll workers used to be very much older, and it was really a group of retired people, and this was important to them. And now when I go to my local polling place up the street, right near Lincoln Center, they're all young people. And so I don't know necessarily what's accounting for that change, but it's been very startling to me to watch that. Bill, do you have any idea of why that's happening?
I don't. although I imagine that the pandemic had a good amount to do with it.
Well,
Um,
that's,
but I do think that there are ongoing efforts to train poll workers. I know that's one of the things that we're helping with some at Third Act, poll workers of all kinds and observers, because this is going to be ever more contentious in ever more places, and we need some calm, uh, 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 just some calm heads out there. So I do think that that's really important work.
Anyone,
too-
Laura? I'm sorry, go ahead, Todd.
I'm just gonna say,
I too was struck by how the people who testified, Lady Ruby and her daughter, that their lives were just shattered by what was happening to them. And I don't know how you build it back, but there has to be a way.
Tom, you were starting to say something too.
well, it just I think so much of this happens really at the hyper local level, and that it's important for people just to get connected with their town organizations and state organizations that are doing that. I know there was one group that we worked with a little bit called Power the Vote, that was kind of trying to build that sort of voter protection into kind of a year-round activity that was happening through the state parties. And they were focused on, I don't know, half a dozen key states, which most of which you could probably figure out, the ones with the toughest voter suppression laws. But part of it was to really, somebody's really paying attention to who is going to administer the elections and all of that, these are jobs that have been below the radar screen for most of us and just really got lifted up quite a bit. So, and I think groups like the New Georgia Project and some of the other grassroots groups are also paying attention to that work.
Laura, were you going to add something?
No, I think that the state parties, the good ones, the high functioning democratic state parties, and they vary enormously, have very sophisticated operations to make sure that there are not only poll workers, but observers at voting locations to make sure that people can vote. We have supported voter protection groups that help folks who encounter problems at the poll, and we'll be supporting those voter empowerment groups again. And as Tom is saying, we're all bracing ourselves for a really rocky 2022 election night. So voter protection is going to be really important.
I just want.
How would you feel at this point if we just bring Jim into the conversation for our last half hours?
Oh, sure, absolutely. And while Jim's coming in, I just wonder what you think. And I have a question. Does the DNC even exist anymore? Or are they all completely asleep at the switch?
Well,
They'll have no message.
so Jamie Harrison, who took on Lindsey Graham for the U.S. Senate, has been the chair of the DNC. We don't work too closely with them. We do work with Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee a little bit more closely. But Laura, you may know more about what the DNC is up to.
Our donor community, again, 9,000 people, we're virtually all elders, are very concerned about the national party messaging. And so we've reached out to many of the candidates we're supporting to find out what they're saying on the ground. And we were very heartened to hear that our incumbents are not waiting for a national message. They're telling a local story that resonates with their community. And the national party, other than feeding them money, which is very important, is not as relevant as the funds that the campaign gets itself, so they can put out their own message. So here's what they're talking about. They're talking about the legislation that they sponsored that got passed that has an impact in their communities. They're talking about the infrastructure dollars and other dollars that were formerly known as earmarks that have come into their communities as a result of their advocacy for their communities. And finally, they're talking about the very impactful constituent services they've provided for their district. And those are the messages that they believe resonate with their constituents and their voters, and they're not waiting for Washington. So while it wasn't a direct response, George, I know where you were going. I think I know where you were going, and I feel much more confident talking to the candidates because they're not waiting for a national message.
And I don't think it would hurt if you, in your communications with your constituencies, if you invited them to send the DNC a message and tell them to wake up and get into this struggle because they appear to be absent. Jim, are you on?
Yeah, thank you. Very scintillating discussion, everyone. I'd like to broaden it just a bit and start with you, Bill, because you mentioned at the beginning that shortly coming up is the Supreme Court is probably going to gut the government's capacities around dealing with climate change, like they just did today around a woman's right to abortion. And so I'd love to have you comment on that and all of you, because it feels to me that if you had to distill down the global crisis right now, you've got at least two code reds. You got code red for democracy, but you've also got code red for climate. And we need to just understand that it's at one level, we got to get out the vote, but at another level, it's at least a two-front war that we're waging here, and understanding both the gravity of the various code reds and the way they interact. Because I think there's a relationship between rising authoritarianism and the fact that we're not dealing with climate change, and particularly with the war in Ukraine. We've seen an extraordinary rollback in everything that, at least at the minimum level, we thought we were achieving, seems to have dissipated. So I just wanted to bring that reality into the conversation. And Bill, with 350.org and everything, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Yeah. So first thing to be said is the stuff that's happening in the Supreme Court today reminds us of both of some of the limitations of political power in Washington. Even if we elect a good Congress, it's not clear how much of what they do will be allowed to stand by the Supreme Court, which is a big problem. And it argues, among other things, for people who have been talking forthrightly about the need to expand that court and some other ways to try and come out and deal with all of that. The same threats to democracy are happening elsewhere around the world. I was in Glasgow for the big climate conference last November, and it was very clear that the world had shifted a lot since the Paris Climate Accords. That is, much of it is now beyond the reach of kind of democratic protest and so on. It's very hard for people to do any work in Brazil under Bolsonaro, a kind of Trump-like figure, in Turkey under Erdogan, in Russia under Putin, in China under Xi Jinping, who's become even more authoritarian, in India under Modi, who has emulated many of these same kind of strongman kind of things. And the people who are taking this on the chin first and foremost are frontline and indigenous environmentalists around the world, and democracy campaigners. I got to sort of preside over the memorial service at Glasgow for the 230 some environmentalists who'd been killed in the preceding year, and mostly they were in South American countries standing up to corporations that wanted, their land, and many of them indigenous. So the absolutely remarkable speed with which the climate is now changing is emerging as the single biggest of these crises, for the simple reason that it's the one that's not in any way reversible. We can, we can lose many things and hope that our children or their children will get them back. But if we lose the North Pole, nobody has a plan for freezing it back up again. And that's what we're very much in the process of doing. So time is very short. And it's one of the reasons why I think we need to work on all tracks. Yes, we definitely need policy change from central governments, but we also need to be pushing hard on the financial system, because it's a very globalized system, and it's actually, if you can force it to work, works quickly when it goes to work. So that's why campaigners around the world are working close to home, but also on global financial systems. And somewhere in there, we hope that there's enough kind of play to allow for the kind of rapid change that scientists have told us we desperately need.
And could you just illuminate for all of us what's at stake in the Supreme Court decision around the EPA, just so that we're
Absolutely. The Supreme Court, West Virginia v. EPA is the case that'll be decided. I think the guess is on Monday. And it will, in the short term, limit, if it comes down as expected, the ability of the EPA to regulate power plants for their climate emissions. But depending on how it's written, it may even more fundamentally challenge the ability of federal agencies to really regulate anything at all. And the theory being put forward by the plaintiffs is that if Congress wants, it's not enough for Congress to have passed the Clean Air Act and then hand it over to the EPA, where scientists draw up regulations to help us figure out what pollutants and how much and so on and so forth. Their theory is that Congress should have to legislate each one of those things. Given what we know about the ability of vested interests to game our political system, the idea that a Congress that can't bring itself to enact background checks on assault rifles is going to sit down and do the hard work of figuring out how much methane is too much is obviously a joke. And this is just an effort to this is the long-running project of the Koch brothers. This is the reason that the Koch brothers purchased the Republican Party some years ago, was precisely for this reason, to get them to get the federal government out of the business of passing pesky regulations to try and somehow protect the world.
Yeah. So lots at stake. Any other comments from you, Tom, or Nancy, or Laura?
I mean, I don't know what to say to that. I mean, on the one hand, we're telling people to go out and vote, and to vote for people who are going to do good things, and really have sort of the interest of the public and the survival of our democracy at heart. And then the other hand, what we're hearing is, how much of a difference does that make in terms of things like the environment, and who's going to have the upper hand? I mean, it doesn't deter me from telling people to go out and vote, but I think there's a realism in there. And, I mean, it goes with actually some of the things that we're hearing from people who have been testifying. I mean, I read the other day that the House Speaker from Arizona was asked whether or not, who he would vote for in the 2024 election. And he said, Trump. If Trump were running against Biden, he would vote for Trump. He was totally bamboozled. I mean, his life was made awful. His daughter was dying, and there were people outside his house protesting and calling him all kinds of names, right? Led by Donald Trump. So it's really hard to sort of draw that line and tell people, sort of do the good thing, right? Because he did the right thing. He stood up to him. And how he can now turn back, I don't know. And I sort of feel like that hearing, Bill talk about, who's going to make the decisions about the environment where we're in such danger of losing it.
I'm really sobered by what you said, Bill, and I think you raised some really good points about kind of other ways in which change can happen now. Nonetheless, I think we have a political battlefield, and we would not have the Supreme Court that we have that's making these kind of decisions if we had been able to hold on to the Senate. So I think, we have to stay in these fights. These fights are critical. If we allow the Republicans to take over the Senate, if nothing else, it's going to accelerate all of the things that we're talking about. And same with the House, too. I mean, we would not have had these January 4th hearings. We would never have heard from all of these high-placed, accomplished leaders what they actually thought and what they actually said on that day. It simply would not have happened. And we cannot let that power go. So I respect and get the point you're making. And it also does make me want to kind of reaffirm the commitment to doing the political work that needs to be done.
I completely, I'll just say I completely agree. And, especially in even numbered years, one's biggest point of leverage is our ability to make political decisions. Just reminding everybody that this is a war, that these are fights with many fronts, and we need to be capable of fighting on all of them, especially as our political system has, even at the best possible outcomes that one can posit for the next few years are still a highly dysfunctional system where it's very difficult to make change at the scale we need on the problems we have. So we need to look for other ways too, but that's in no way minimum. I mean, that's why at Third Act, we're deeply engaged in all of this work around turning out the vote. And some of it's really fun. I'll just say one of the things that we've really enjoyed is writing thousands of this program called Seniors to Seniors, writing thousands of letters to high school seniors as they graduate this spring, telling them about our history as voters and encouraging them to register. There's only about 10% of high school seniors actually vote in the first election that they're eligible to vote in. And so it's really fun and very, a good reminder to all of us who are writing these letters not to take any of this for granted ever either.
So I just want to clarify that I'm not suggesting that we get involved politically at all. And I think voting is incredibly, incredibly important. And I totally agree that we wouldn't be where we were if, there weren't some of the right people in the House and the Senate. And I think we have to continue to remind people of that. And it's also, we're in it for the long haul. As we've all seen in our lifetime, change doesn't happen overnight, but you have to keep on working at it.
Just maybe one kind of hopeful note is that, we are the majority, actually. We actually are the majority. And one thing that happened in 2018 and 2020 is that there were 25 million new voters that came out, people who had not voted in 2016 and prior elections, to repudiate Trumpism. So we have like a historic advantage for the midterms, Democrats being we, progressives being we, in terms of mobilizing those 25 people, reconnecting them to, the issues that are at stake. And that number gives me hope. And I think that I'm aware of Biden's approval ratings and all of those kinds of supposed predictors, but I think there are other factors at play in this election, and that I just want to challenge a little bit the pessimistic narrative that's already developed about the midterms. It's ironic the Republicans are still fighting over an election they lost 15 months ago, and the Democrats are ready to give up on one that hasn't happened yet. So
So let me follow up on what you just said, because there are a lot of people, as we know, out there trying to register, particularly seniors in high school. There's an enormous amount of work that does go on college campuses, and more so now that kids are back on college campuses. But as you're talking, it occurs to me, are we, and I'm going to use, as we used to say, the term we loosely, because you may be the we in this. Can we reach out to school superintendents around the country en masse? Can we reach out to school principals around the country en masse and encourage them that as citizens, it's their job to encourage their seniors to vote in a fully nonpartisan manner? And I don't know whether that leverage exists. I don't know whether that organization, they can be reached that way, particularly over the summer, to really take this on as a national issue. But I just wanted to raise it because of what you and others are doing.
Great idea. But here we go again. If We the People Act had passed, if even the Manchin version of We the People had passed, we would have had the issue of voter registration would have substantially disappeared.
Well, and
One
Nancy,
can,
Laura, one, yes, but one also wonders,
It's a legislative solution in large part.
but one wonders, given the January 6th hearing, and we were just thinking, Margo and I were just thinking about this recently, can we now bring some of those bills back to the floor? As we're seeing, one of the sets of polling is that there were 20% of Trump voters who didn't believe in the big lie. After the hearings are up to 20%. We're seeing Republican congressmen, a few of them, along with Liz and Adam, willing to stand up. Is there enough of a shift in the House and the Senate that a different kind of bill could actually pass in time to make a difference? And that's just pure speculation on our end.
Our mantra is let's expand the Senate, because the filibuster is just strangling this country. And the day the Republicans, I'm willing to bet money, the day the Republicans take office, they're going to kill the filibuster for their purposes. So why don't we kill it first? But we can't do that with the 50-50 Senate. We got to get, yes, and as Tom was saying, let's make DC a state. Let's make Puerto Rico a state. Let's work on modifying the Electoral College using the compact that Jamie Raskin has pushed through dozens of state legislatures. I'm not sure folks are familiar with this, but there are other ways to skin the cat to make this country more representative in Congress, but we need an expanded Senate. And obviously we need to hold the House in order to make it happen.
I also think we need something else that Bill has talked about several times. I think we do need to be working on in every possible area. I think getting out the vote is critical. I think getting the right candidates elected is critical. Expanding the Senate, all of these kinds of things are critical. But I remember the days that this 70 million size population, and if you go down another decade or so, you get close to 100 million people who are 50 and older in the United States. I remember when we had the guts to go out in the street and stop things. I remember when we had guts to do a lot of different things. Right now, we've become virtual participants in a world. I mean, Justice Thomas just recently, a little while ago, issued a release saying that he thinks we should reconsider contraception, same-sex marriage rulings. They're all in the same category as Roe versus Wade. We are in a battle for our survival, and we have to do everything, every waking moment that we have, in every way. And we ought to talk to our constituency. Sedina and I wrote a book. Our company is called Age Nation, called Do Not Go Quietly. And I'm afraid we are going too quietly. I'm afraid that we are not making, as John Lewis says, enough
No.
good trouble. And the way we do it is to go outside of the lines. We can't stay strictly in the same old game because that game is rigged. We do need to vote. We need to vote massively. But I believe it is time that we stop waiting and start acting fully and completely.
We're having, George, you'll be happy to hear a series of seminars and trainings on nonviolent direct action at Third Act over the course of the summer.
Count me in. It's critical.
And I know that seniors vote in one of the highest numbers. And so it's really important to make sure that they go out and vote. At the same time, I think working with other groups like League of Women Voters to go in and register voters and high schools. I mean, there are a lot of groups that are doing that, but I think you can never really have too many. My husband was a superintendent of schools, and he's no longer. But there are ways to go into high schools. It's really nonpartisan, what you're doing, and you just want people to understand how important it is. Friends of mine just did that on Martha's Vineyard, and they said that it was amazing how excited 17-year-olds were to be able to pre-register so that when they turn 18, they're already registered. So there are lots of ways that we can do that.
Jim Garrison, any other big questions for us or small?
Well, I think just a note, I think we're in one of those moments where we can't figure our way through. And I think we should also honor it as not necessarily pessimism, but a dawning realization, I think, on everyone that the world is not only getting more and more complex, but the areas of danger are multiplying, and that we're in multiple code reds in multiple ways, each one of which is potentially lethal. And how we, as people of goodwill, whether over 60 or under 60, navigate through what's coming is not altogether clear. And I would just say, having convened, over 500 sessions on Humanity Rising, what I feel is an increasing uncertainty, both in terms of how to understand what's going on and in terms of what really to do about it. And so I just want to honor that. We're in a cloud of unknowing, and we feel the centrifugal force spinning. And at one level, we're feeling more passionate, but at another level, we're feeling more powerless. And so I think there's a real discussion at some point about the existential realities that we're confronted by, and what really is the right thing to do under current circumstances. And I don't know the answer to that, but I feel it in program after program on Humanity Rising, a deepening sense of bewilderment and a commensurate level of stress. We had a session 2 weeks ago on the mental health of youth, and every single category, and not just in the United States, but worldwide, every single category of psychological, mental, and emotional dis-ease is going up, including in the general population. And so I come back to George's question in some ways. It's Einstein's axiom that the consciousness that produced the problem can't solve it. And are we on the left? Are we in the progressive movements doing the same thing, where we keep doing the same thing over and over that we've always done, and kind of expecting a different outcome, knowing that it's not quite keeping up? And is it a time for radical reassessment and revolutionary comportment. And what that implies, I don't know. But what I think is deeply true as you look around the world is that we're losing ground.
Jim, the only thing I want to say to that is I agree about the complexity and the bewilderment and all the rest of it. But there's one fundamental truth. We the people are the fodder for a system that is destroying us. And the question I believe we need to ask is, how much longer are we going to collude in our own destruction? If we bring this system to a halt, if we cut off the energy that is being used against us, we have the opportunity to catch the attention of people who are out for the power and the money and the progress that they think that they're creating. But right now, we are a servant population of prisoners who are colluding in our own economic, social, political, and ecological destruction. And that's something eventually we have to pay attention to.
And George and Jim, what I'd say to that is this real creative tension between what we do know how to do in the short run, which is what we've talked about today, is vote. What we're learning what we can do in the medium and long run, and the uncertainty that you're talking about. Because the question, George, is how do we harness the energy you want to bring forth with what's practical and doable? And my sense is that question and those questions are one that we have to dive into after November the 8th. Between now and then, I think it's a focus on what Force Multiplier is doing, what Third Act is doing, what seniors taking action, and hundreds of groups around the country are doing. And I don't want to see our concern about uncertainty and the bigger picture get in the way of what we all know we have to do now with Code Red.
Very good point.
Because Code Red for democracy precedes, sadly, in our country, of Code Red for climate, even though, Bill, as you well know, so much good is going on in states and localities and all the work you're doing around the world. So I'd love to see this conversation proceed after November, because I don't think we have the capacity to organize in a collective way that can make an impact, anything substantial. Not that we shouldn't, but we won't between now and then, and I don't think we should.
I don't disagree about Code Red and voting. I think it's an and, not an or. I'm entirely.
It's an and. We're in not just a both and world. We're in an all and world, as my wife says.
And let's not wait and close the door after the horse is out of the barn.
George, when you give me something practical,
I've given you a 100-page manuscript with maybe 1,000 recommendations. So I've given you a lot that's practical.
I think most people can do one or two, and I think we know the one or two. And I really will continue this creative conversation. It's a good
okay. We will do that.
Why don't we just have? We're a little bit over time, but maybe Laura, you first, and Tom, and then Nancy. Give us a kind of a final word, a final admonition, whatever you'd like to say as a result of this conversation, in the spirit of what John just said. We've got to make it happen in November. We've got to get out the vote. That's the one thing we all can do. But give us a final word. Laura first.
Thank you, Jim, for inviting us to join you today. I'm grateful for the conversation and the comments in chat. I think that at our ripe old age, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So let's do everything we can to elect a Democratic majority in the US Congress, while at the same time following the lead of creative, good troublemakers like Bill McKibben to take action in other ways. I don't think it's an either or. It's, as someone said in chat, an and. So please come join us. And we have some great guests coming up. And the next one is Bill McKibben, where we will have this conversation in more depth. So thank you.
And Laura, you put that in the chat where folks can.
Yep, I'm going to do it one last time.
Tom?
Well, we also have the event after that is coming up with the authors of the book, How Democracies Die, which I assume many people on this call have read. But that also will be in support of our House slate. I was just thinking, as we've quoted John Lewis so many times, that this activist also chose ultimately to serve in Congress. And that I think that says a whole lot, that he decided to go there to make some good trouble. One lens I have for thinking about how I'm showing up in this period of time is what's in my control? What is in my sphere of influence? What are the things that I actually can do something about? I actually can't do much about what Joe Biden says. I actually can't do much about how the stories of the day get reported in various kinds of media, but I myself can be a form of media, and I can be a democratic messenger, and I can be talking to the people in my world about what I think is important. And that's kind of been the guiding principle of force multiplier, is to think about that, think about the people that we are connected to, and maybe open up and have some new kinds of conversations with them about the political moment. And I think one thing that force multiplier offers is a pathway into political engagement. And I'm feeling all this anxiety. Everybody I'm talking to is feeling the same thing pretty much. I'm offering them something by giving them a pathway into force multiplier, a way that you can be an active citizen. So I think that's where our focus is. And thanks so much for having us here. This is really an amazing event. John and Jim and George, Nancy, it's a pleasure to be here with you. And of course, an honor to be on the same stage, as it were, with Bill McKibben.
Nancy?
So I guess
you, Tom.
my parting words would be that I invite you all to join with Seniors Taking Action. Our speaker series is really quite extraordinary, and I suggest that you go to our website to look at it. And I guess the other one is each one reach one. So if we all make a commitment, everybody who's on this call, to reach out to at least 5 people and encourage them to vote, and have those 5 people reach out to 5 people. It's pretty grassroots oriented, and it's actually easy, and you can really see the impact. And I guess the last thing that I would say is I encourage everybody to write postcards. They really seem to be working. They encourage people, they give them information, they tell them where to vote, they tell them when to vote, and they tell them how to vote. And so I agree with you, John, that there's nothing more important that we can do right now than to really encourage and make sure that everybody that we know and everybody that those people know, and use the multiplier effect, that gets out to vote in November. And that's the beginning, it's not the end. And so it has to continue after that.
None of us can speak on behalf of Bill McKibben, who probably had another place he had to go. And the fact that he spent an hour and 45 minutes today is really remarkable. But just to honor him and what he holds and what he's done and what he continues to do on behalf of democracy and climate is truly remarkable. So Jim and George, bless you both for being able to get him on today.
Thank you for inviting us to participate. And it was very nice to meet you all.
And thank you all for taking the time to be part of this program and to share what you do and how you do it. You are dealing with a constituency that is vital to this election and actually vital to the future of America. So I celebrate the work that you do.
Thank you,
George.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This has been a marvelous session and conclusion of our 5-day program on the challenge and crisis of democracy. That'll do it for us for today. We invite you to join the after session chat group. Those of you who are interested, you'll see the link in the chat box. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you here again on Humanity Rising on Monday for a new 5-day program on science and consciousness. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.
Bye.